Alright, hello 5191. This is the third time I'm attempting to record this video, so if my excitement is waning, that's why. My screen capture software keeps crashing, but hopefully I will get through it this time. So I want to make a video on XML and XSLT transformation. If you watched the video from last week, and you should have watched the video, you need to be keeping up with the readings. You should have a very solid conceptual understanding of what XSLT is doing. Okay? If you don't understand that, that's on you. It's very clearly explained in the video. Okay? Go back and watch it. This is going to make no sense to you unless you've watched that. For those of you that have a good conceptual understanding, what this video is going to do is to really give you a really nice technical foundation and connect the dots between sort of what's happening technically and the conceptual connections between XML and XSLT. Okay, so for those of you that are super far along and have tables that are pulling data already and you're like done, this is still going to be useful because I want to explain that XSLT can output information in lots of different ways, right? And everyone in the class has used the table template. You know, you've pulled the template from the example from the course website and you're displaying information via a table, and that's totally fine. I encourage that. But I want to really make explicit that XSLT can output information in ways that aren't just tables, right? So what I want to do is just kind of walk you through that process and display information in a way that's not a table. And I think by doing that, it'll give you sort of a more clear understanding of XML and XSLT. So for those of you that are far along in the project, I would encourage you to watch on. For those of you that are just starting the project and just starting to kind of figure out XML and XSLT, this is going to be super helpful for you, I think. And so use this as a nice reference point, slow down on the technical spots, rewind and rewatch certain things if you need to. So conceptually, really quickly, again, I'll encourage you to rewatch that video if you're still trying to grasp what XSLT is doing. But essentially what it's doing is XSLT pulls data from XML and displays it any way you tell it to display it. Okay? You could tell it to display it as an HTML table. You could tell it to display it as a PDF file. You could tell it to display it as even as a transformed XML file. So you can actually turn XML into different XML. So XSLT is really powerful. And so we're just looking at one application of XSLT, and that's transforming the XML into HTML. Okay, so that's important to understand. Secondly, a couple key technical ideas I want to go over before walking through some code. So the XML must talk to the XSL file. So there needs to be some kind of communication between the two. That's accomplished by the second line in the XML file here. You can Google it or look on the reference XML files from the course website, but that's what this is doing. Okay, XML style sheet, hypertext reference list.xsl. That piece of code is talking to this on the right here, which is my XSL file. Okay, so just for future reference throughout the video, on the left is my XML file, on the right is my XSL file. Okay. Second thing we need to know, XSL must be coded hierarchically. That is, you can't skip to a child without first referencing a parent in XML, in XSL. Gosh, I'm sorry. So for example, if we've got, and that's why also I'll say this, it's really important to have well-formed XML that actually has visual hierarchy so that you actually understand what's a child and what's not a child, right? So for example, class is a child of schedule, and week is a child of class. But we also have learning objective, which also has a child, so which is objective. So objective is a child of learning objective. It's also a grandchild of class. It's also a great-grandchild of schedule. Okay, So I can't just immediately reference objective without first referencing learning objective. I can't first reference learning objective without first referencing class, and I can't reference class without first referencing schedule. Okay? So again, you can't just skip down to a child. You need to reference things hierarchically. And we'll take a look at what that means when we actually look at some code. Now, XSLT, basically you need to know two pieces of code. If you know these two pieces of code, you know XSLT for the most part. Obviously, there's other things, more complex things, but for the purposes of making things function, you need to know two things. The first is XSL for each. Okay, so XSL, the syntax for XSL is the same as HTML in that it uses brackets. But to indicate that it's an XSL syntax, we do XSL colon and then whatever the command is. Okay, so the first command that you need to know is for each, and that is selecting a particular tag. It's creating a loop, and then the second is XSL colon value of, and that's selecting a particular value. Okay, so for each is selecting sort of at a high level the tag itself, and value of is selecting the content inside of the tag. Okay, that's important distinction to understand. I'll say it one more time. The for each is selecting the tag itself. The value of is selecting the actual content inside of the tag. Okay, so if I were to say for each class, I would be selecting the class tag. If I were to say value of week, I would be selecting actually the content inside of week 1. Okay, so that is a major distinction you need to understand. Value of, if you do value of a specific tag, so for example, XSL value of objective, that will only display one and only one objective. Okay, important. I'll say it again. When you do value of, select, and you specify a specific tag, it only displays one and only one output. So, if I were to do value of objective, it would only display the first objective for every learning objective for each class. Okay? In order to display multiple, so if you have in your XML a tag that has multiple outputs, so like if you've got K-pop songs and your tag is song or song title, you're in this boat, right? You've got a tag that has multiple outputs. Song title, there's, an album with 10 song titles. So you're in the same boat here. You can't do value of select song title. It'll only display the first song title. Okay, so that's important to understand. Also for embedded children, so if I want to display multiple objectives, you have to create multiple for each loops. Okay, and all of that will make much more sense once we walk through an example. Okay, so let's walk through an example right now. Okay, what we got on the left is the same XML file that is driving the schedule on the course website. Okay, the same one we've been looking at in class, the one we've been using as an example, etc., etc. Okay. What I want to do first is I want to show you what HTML is doing. What you would have to do in HTML in order to accomplish what we're doing in XSL. Okay, so in HTML, I've created a table. So this is a file called table.html. I just created it for the particular tutorial. Okay, so if we were to create a web page with all of this information, the class schedule, right? So the week, the date, the learning objective, the in-class activity, the reading, and the homework. And we were to do that for 16 weeks, we would have to do a few things. So let me just explain real quickly what we have here. We've got the table tag in HTML. You should be familiar with this as it's been assigned in the readings. We've got a row tag, and inside of the first row, we want to put a bunch of headers, right? So that's where these header tags are. TH stands for table head. So the first row is the table head, and then in the next row is one full entry, right? So we've got one full entry, and inside of that is each column, right? So the data for each column is displayed, okay? So if we take a look at this, if we take a look at this example HTML file, and this is going to be slow. I feel like my computer's about to die. Test. Oh no. Example. Here we go. So if you look at table.html, if we pull it up, it slowly appears. Maybe. There we go. Slowly appears. Jeez. You can see we have one entry, right? So week 1, October 7, 2014, learning objective, in class, activity, reading, assign, homework, right? So this is one full entry. Now, if we actually wanted to create the full entry of this in HTML, so if we wanted to hard code this in HTML, we're not working with any XML, we're not doing anything with databases, we would simply copy and paste this 16 times, right? And then we would change the content inside each column. So 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. Okay. So now we've got, and so all we've done is copied and pasted it. We would have to change the actual data. But we have 139 lines of code. But we would have to change this to week 2, October 14th, and then so on and so forth. I'm not going to do it for all of them. But I'm going to save this, and I'm going to open it and show you now what table looks like. And I apologize, this is my computer, I feel like is going to die. So it should be appearing at some point here in the near future. Or not. If this thing dies on me again, I don't know. All right, so it'll be here. Here we go. So again, we've got a table that's displaying a bunch of data, but it's all hard-coded into the HTML, okay? And so I wanted to show you this so that it's very clear to you what the XML is actually doing. Because that was 139 lines of code. We can accomplish, we can accomplish the same thing by using XSL in 67 lines of code. Okay, and so what the XSL is doing is, so instead of hard coding all of the data, right? So instead of putting week 1 where it's asking for the week, right? Instead of putting week 1 in the actual table, instead we're simply telling it to, inside of the TD, inside of the column, populate it with the week, whatever is in the week from our XML file. Okay, so I just wanted to sort of show you the difference between hard-coded HTML and an XSLT file that's pulling, it's creating HTML, but it's pulling from an XML database. Okay, so again, instead of me writing out each learning objective, I'm just saying inside of this bulleted list, select all of the objectives for each, display all of the objectives in a list item for each objective. Okay, so that's basically what XSLT is doing, right? So instead of us having to hard code 16 weeks worth of data into a table, we can pull from an XML database and use some programming to tell it to display in a certain way. Okay, hopefully that made sense. Hopefully that was helpful for you. So why would we want to do that? One, it's a pain in the rear to manage a table this big, right? So like figuring out what week 1, 2, 3, 4 is, figuring out which row lines up with each column, or which column lines up with each header, so on and so forth. Okay, so one, it's a pain to manage. Two, if we ever wanted to output this in different ways, right? So if I wanted to output this in a PDF, which I do, if I wanted to output this in a different type of table, which I do, it wouldn't be possible without making changes to all of those different outputs individually, right? So it's just simply the idea of single sourcing. Okay. Okay. So that's my little table example. Hopefully that was helpful. Let's just quickly walk through. Let's walk through an example where I'm going to create an XSLT file from scratch and display things not in a table, something that's not in a table. Okay, just to show you this can be done for things that are not in a table. Okay, so to create an XSLT file, again, it needs to be .xsl, so you can see that up here. Put it in the same folder as our XML file. So we need our .type declaration, XML version 1.0. So XSLT files are actually just XML files. Okay. Second line must be the XSL style sheet declaration. Okay. Google it or copy and paste it from the example. And then the next line must be the template match. Okay. So the first 3 lines require 0 creativity. Okay. You must have these 3 things. Okay. So if you're stuck, if your XML is not talking correctly to your XSL, start from scratch. Start from what I'm doing right now and just walk through the process. Make sure you have these 3 lines exactly how they should be, and start from scratch. That's the easiest way. The 4th line must be HTML, and then our head and our body. So just like a normal HTML page, okay? Then we close our HTML, and then we close our template, and then we close our style sheet, okay? So it's important to make sure that you have all of the components of a valid XSL style sheet before trying to make things work, okay? So while I encourage you to reverse engineer things, hopefully this video will more clearly show you how these connections work. Okay, so first thing we need to do is for our XSL template match, which every XSL sheet must have, we need to select our parent tag. Okay, so we need to select the tag that encompasses our entire database. So you need to have a tag that encompasses your entire database. In our case, it's schedule. So it's \schedule. Basically, we're saying everything below here is inside of schedule. Everything that's to come is inside of schedule. So again, that idea of you can't skip to children before you reference the parent, this is our reference to the biggest parent, the main parent, which is schedule. Okay? Okay, hopefully we're all clear. Let's move to body. So body is what actually appears in a web page. That's what appears in the body of a web page, thus body. And so what I'm going to do is, instead of displaying a table, I'm going to display something in an H1 tag. So H1 stands for header in HTML. Sorry, my brain is slowly shutting off. So what I want to do is I want to create a bunch of headers. I want to display a bunch of headers for the week. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just display the learning objectives for each week. Okay? And so I don't need a table for that because that's not really tabular information. I just want to create headers to display the weeks and paragraphs or bulleted lists. It'll be a wild card. I'll decide when I do it to display the objectives. Okay? So if I wanted to display my H1, I need to select week. Okay? So again, there's really only two tags in the XSLT you need to know. So the first one is the value of. So XSL value of, select week. And that's a self-closing tag. Okay? So you got to remember that little backslash, or what is that, a forward slash, before you close the tag. Okay? Okay, so basically I'm saying inside of my H1 tag, I want to select and display each of the weeks. So it should display week 1, week 2, week 3, week 4, etc. Okay, now again, we cannot skip children, right? So we need to, week is a child of class, right? So if week is a child of class, we need to reference that parent. So again, there's two tags you need to understand in XSL. One is XSL value of, and the other is XSL for each. And again, as I said earlier in the video, XSL for each refers to selecting a tag. XSL value of refers to selecting the content inside of a tag. Okay, big difference, important to understand. Okay. So for each class, we're going to display the week. Okay, week 1, week 2, week 3. So for each class, and there's 16 classes or whatever, 15 classes, I'm going to display the content, that's the value of, inside of the tag week. Okay? And I'm going to display that inside of an H1 header. Okay. All tags that open must close. So I'm going to close this for each loop. So close XSL for each after I display each week. Okay. So what this is going to do is, if all goes well, it should display week 1, week 2, week 3, week 4, week 5, week 6, week 7 in H1 tags. So they should be fairly large and they should look like headers. So let's test this out. Let's see if it'll actually open without breaking. I'm going to open up schedule.xml in Safari. That works. And we're going to hopefully something will happen. There we go. Hopefully the beach ball of death goes away. It's doing something. It wants to do something. There we go. Wow, it did exactly what we wanted it to do, which is incredible. So again, week 1, week 2, week 3, week 4, week 5, all the way to the end. Okay, so we selected the value of week, and so by selecting the value of week, the content inside of the week tag is displayed on the screen inside of a header tag. Very good. That's exactly what we wanted. So as you can see, we're pulling from the database, and we're not displaying as a table. Instead, we're displaying it inside of an H1 tag. Okay. So I had some questions from some students about, how do you display this in other ways? This is exactly how you display it in other ways. You use HTML to wrap inside of different XSL tags. Okay. Another thing, this was accomplished in 3 lines of code, whereas if I were to hard code this in HTML, I would have to do H1 16 times. So this is accomplished in 3 lines of code. If we did it hard coded in HTML, it would take 16 lines of code, right? Because you'd have to do H1 week 1, H1 week 2, H1 week 3, so on and so forth. Okay. Now the next thing I want to do is I want to display the objective, each learning objective, underneath each H1 tag. Okay, so underneath H1, I want to, and I'm just gonna I'll put it in a list. I'm gonna put it. I'm going to use the unordered list tag, and I want to put each objective in a list. Okay. So I'm going to do something incorrectly on purpose for the purposes of illustration, right? So we want to select we want to use the value of tag, right? So XSL value of, and if we want to display the content inside of the objective, it would make sense for us to do this, right? To specify, so inside of the list tag, let's do XSL value of objective, okay? But again, we need to remember we can't skip children, we can't skip parents, skip over parents. So we haven't referenced learning objective yet, but we're referencing objective. So we need to reference learning objective. So this is an example of what's called an embedded for each loop. So again, we only need to know we're only really working with 2 lines of, basically 2 lines of code. So XSL for each, select learning objective. So for each learning objective, create a unordered list, and inside of the bullet point, select objective, right? Makes perfect sense to me. Now every tag that opens must close. So we're going to close the for each loop. So we've got 2 for each loops now. We've got for each class. We've also got for each learning objective. Okay? So let's save that. And again, I know that I've done something incorrectly. I'm doing this for purposes of illustration. Let's open this again in Safari. And we wait. Okay, so I knew this was going to happen, and so I wanted to show you guys why. Okay, so our H1s are displaying properly, and in fact our objectives are displaying properly, but the issue is it's only displaying one objective for each learning objective, right? So every week only has one bullet point, and some of them have no bullet points. And so why is that? That's not what we want. So let's go back to this. So the reason why is, as I said earlier in the PowerPoint slide, and I would pull it back up if I didn't think it would crash the system. But in the PowerPoint slide, if you select a specific tag inside of the value of, it only displays one and only one output. Remember, I was saying that earlier, right? So I'll say it again because this is important. If you select a specific tag inside of value of, it only displays one and only one output, okay? So that's important to understand because, again, most of you are going to have tags that have multiple items, right? So, for example, objective has multiple items, multiple outputs. So, to fix that, this little piece of syntax will be very helpful for you. So, instead of specifying a specific tag, you specify with a dot, and that says display all objectives. So that says display everything for each learning objective. So all tags underneath each learning objective display in a separate bulleted list. Not a separate bulleted list, I'm sorry. In a separate list item. Okay, so that little period is actually very magical. It'll display everything instead of just one single thing. Hope that makes sense. So let's pull it up again and let's refresh. And okay, so they're displaying, but they're only displaying as on one bulleted list, right? So multiple objectives are only displaying on one line, and that's not what we want, right? So students will know the definition of digital literacy. Students will apply the principles of project workflow. So we've got two objectives here, but they're displaying on one line, okay? So, and I knew that was going to happen because what we've done is we've said for each learning objective, so let's just try to break it down logically. So for each learning objective, display everything underneath, that's what that period indicates, inside of a list tag. Well, that's not what we want. We want it inside of multiple list tags, right? We don't want it inside of one list tag. So what we need to do is we need to create an additional for each loop, okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a for each loop before the list tag, okay? So XSL for each, select, and I'm going to select objective. Okay, so I want to select objective, and I want to close it. Right after the list tag. So now what we're saying is, for each learning objective and for each objective, display everything inside of that objective in separate list items. Okay, so again, for each learning objective and also for each objective, display everything inside, that's what that dot is, the objective in a separate bulleted list. Okay, so let me save that and refresh. And that's exactly what's happening now, right? So instead of everything on one line, it's displaying the content of each objective on a separate line, right? So now some weeks have 3 bullet points, some weeks have 2 bullet points, some weeks have 1 bullet point, right? So now we've got a bunch of headers and just the learning objectives. Cool? Okay. So that is an important little lesson in multiple for each loops. Okay, multiple for each loops. you're gonna be messing with multiple for each loops when you've got children and those children have children, right? And all of your database files have multiple levels in your hierarchy. So you're gonna run into this at some point. Now, what if I just wanted to display these? What if I just wanted to display each of these as a paragraph instead of a list? Well, you could do that, and you could. So if you just change the list item to paragraph and removed the UL tag, these would just display as paragraphs instead of lists. I mean, it makes more sense to display them as lists, but just for illustrative purposes, if you wanted to, they're now paragraphs, right? So now these are marked up as paragraphs. So if you have things that are paragraph content, that's how you would mark it up.